chandeliers glowed like drops of frozen sunlight, their golden light spilling across polished marble floors. Shadows stretched long beneath velvet banners, each one embroidered with the proud mark of the wolf. The great hall was alive with whispers, silk rustling, and the heavy perfume of roses that filled the air. Tonight was not just any night. Tonight was the choosing ceremony, the gathering where daughters of noble families would present themselves to the Alpha King in hopes of being recognized, chosen and bound to power. But no one knew the truth. The Alpha King had already arrived, not with crown or cloak, but hidden among them in the plain armor of a wandering guard. Noah Blackwood, Alpha King of the Western Pack, stood at the edge of the hall with his hood pulled low over his brow. The leather of his armor creaked with his every step. The weight of the sword at his hip was nothing compared to the weight of secrecy pressing on his chest. For years he had been revered, feared, even worshipped. Tonight he wanted to see something different. He wanted to know if anyone could see him, the man, not the crown. Around him, noble ladies gathered in glittering gowns, their hair pinned in careful braids, jewels flashing as they turned their heads. Their voices rose in soft laughter, but each pair of eyes slid past him as though he were smoke. Some frowned at the armor, others wrinkled their noses. A stranger in such common attire had no place in a hall like this. Noah endured the looks, the whispers. It was what he had expected. For too long he had wondered whether loyalty came from love or from fear of his power. This ceremony, meant to honor him, was his chance to discover the truth in disguise. At the center of the hall, beneath the light of the chandeliers, a silver throne stood waiting. It was empty, the king's absence carefully explained by advisors. The Alpha King will arrive at the final hour, they had told the guests. Until then, enjoy the dance, the music, the chance to prove your grace. And so the women laughed, danced and smiled, for one another, for the families watching from the edges, but not for him. Noah moved quietly like a shadow, watching them. His chest ached, though he told himself it should not matter. Yet when a group of women swept close, their words drifted to him sharp as blades. Who let him in? One whispered, her jeweled hand lifting to cover her mouth. A guard, maybe, or worse, a stray wolf pretending to belong here. Another replied, her voice laced with disdain. How pitiful, standing there as though he could ever be chosen. The laughter that followed was soft but cruel. Noah lowered his gaze, jaw tightening. Power meant nothing if respect was only for the crown. Then, through the swirl of silver and blue gowns, he saw her. She wore crimson, unlike the others, who sparkled in shades of frost and moonlight. She stood in deep red, a color that drew every flicker of flame from the chandeliers and wrapped it around her like fire. Her hair was chestnut brown, falling in soft waves, and her eyes were warm, searching, alive. She was not the most ornate in dress, nor did she wear jewels beyond a simple band at her waist. And yet there was something unshakable in the way she stood, as though the room had not been built to define her. She had been built to define the room. Her name was Claire Matthews. Claire had not wanted to attend. She was not the daughter of wealth or power, but had been brought by her aunt, whose only wish was to see her married into better fortune. Claire, however, had grown weary of empty words and polished smiles. She dreamed of something beyond titles, beyond thrones, and of a love that was real. Her gaze drifted across the hall, and then it stopped. She saw him, not the armor, not the lowered hood, not the way others stepped around him as though he carried disease. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the silence pressed into his stance, the loneliness that wrapped around him like a second cloak. Something inside her stirred. Claire crossed the hall. The music slowed as though strings and flutes had noticed her step. Whispers rose in her wake. The women she passed arched brows, confusion darkening their painted faces. Why would anyone approach him? Why waste even a glance? But Claire did not stop. When she reached him, she lifted her hand, not in command, not in fear, but in quiet offering. Why do you stand alone? She asked softly, her voice carrying in the hush that had fallen over the hall. Noah raised his eyes, startled. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him without knowing who he was. Without bowing, without rehearsed flattery, without fear. I don't belong here, he said, testing her. His voice was rough like gravel beneath boots. Neither do I, Claire whispered. A small smile touched her lips. Perhaps we don't belong anywhere else either. The words struck him, gentle as rain yet fierce as thunder. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some women shook their heads, others smirked, whispers curling like smoke. "She's making a fool of herself," someone hissed. Speaking to a stranger like that, how shameless. But Claire didn't turn to them. Her eyes stayed on him, steady, certain. Something inside Noah shifted. For years he had carried his crown like a shield, his throne like a cage, and here before him stood a woman who dared to see past the iron walls he had built. His hand rose, almost without thought, and for the first time, he let his hood fall. The hall froze. Gasps filled the air, louder now, tangled with disbelief. The chandeliers seemed to tremble in their chains, casting shards of light across the stunned faces of the crowd. The stranger was no stranger. He was their Alpha King. Noah Blackwood stood revealed, the golden light cutting across the sharp line of his jaw, the storm in his eyes, the weight of his presence filling the room. Those who had laughed now lowered their gazes in shame. Those who had sneered pressed hands to their lips, their faces pale, yet Claire did not flinch. Her hand, still outstretched, did not fall away. "You knew," Noah murmured, voice low enough for only her to hear. "I didn't," she replied. "But I saw you. Isn't that enough?" It was more than enough. For the first time, Noah smiled. Not the practiced smile of a king, not the tight grin of authority, but something real, something fragile and alive. He reached out, taking her hand in his grip strong but careful, as though she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "My people," Noah said, his voice echoing through the hall. "You watched and you judged. You scorned what you did not recognize. Yet here stands one who dared to see with more than eyes." Silence held the hall. No one dared to breathe. "This woman," he continued, turning toward Claire, "has shown more courage in a single step than many show in a lifetime. She saw me when others looked away. She offered her hand when others turned their backs." He lifted her hand, pressing it gently to his heart. "Tonight the throne will not choose a jewel, nor a family's fortune. Tonight it will honor truth. And I choose her." The hall erupted, some in disbelief, some in reluctant applause, others in tears they could not explain. Families shifted uneasily. Nobles whispered their protests, but none dared to raise a voice louder than the king's. Claire stood in red, her cheeks warmed by the glow of chandeliers and by the weight of every gaze. Yet when she looked at Noah, she saw no crown, no throne, only the man who had stood alone in a crowded room. And he, in turn, saw no audience, no ceremony, only the woman who had given him back his heart. The music swelled, softer now, almost reverent. The chandeliers glowed brighter as though the very walls rejoiced. Noah drew Claire close, and together they stepped toward the silver throne, not as king and chosen prize, but as two souls who had found one another against all odds. And for the first time in the long history of the Pax, the choosing ceremony ended not in silence but in hope.